This is going to be something a little bit different for my channel. I normally don't do the whole movie review thing, and this isn't really going to be a review. It's mostly just going to be me talking for an extended period of time. I don't know quite how long it's going to be, but I thought it would be a good opportunity, considering I just saw it, to talk about Ghost in the Shell, the live action movie that was just released in 2017. And like I said, this isn't going to be a review. I'm not going to show footage of the film. I don't even want to deal with the whole YouTube copyright thing. I just thought I would sit down and share some of my thoughts, and you guys can tell me if it's something that you enjoy and you want me to do more of, or if it's something that isn't really worth your time. Basically, I'm going to give you an idea of what I thought of the film, the things that I thought it did well, that it did poorly, both from a film standpoint and also from a technical standpoint, and also just kind of talk about the industry in general. So this is something you can kind of sit back, relax, just listen to. I'm not really going to show anything that's all that important. It's just going to be me talking. I know a lot of my videos are like that already, but this one is especially going to be that way. So I just want to make sure I say that from the beginning so no one's disappointed when the visuals aren't that interesting. And yes, it's a video on YouTube, but really it's meant just to kind of listen to. Now, I just saw Ghost in the Shell, and right off the bat, I gotta say that this is probably not a movie I would recommend you to see. If you're a fan of the original anime that came out in the 90s, you may want to see this just for nostalgic reasons or to see how it was adapted to live action. But I think for the normal person going to see a movie, this is one you could probably skip. Now, I'd never seen the original anime. I know it's a huge blight that I've never seen it, but thankfully I actually kind of like that I was able to go in this kind of fresh with clean eyes and not really clouded by any nostalgia. So I'm just judging this as a film on its own without really any connection to the original anime. And there's plenty of other reviewers out there. You can go listen to them if you're looking for somebody who's actually going to compare it to the original. But for me, I want to judge it just as a film on its own. And I thought it was very underwhelming. Sometimes when you go see movies, you have to be in the right mood. And I was definitely in the right mood. I was excited to see it. I had heard positive things. I don't like to do too much research before I go in to see a movie because I don't want any spoilers or anything to taint my judgment of it. But I had heard, reasonably good things about it and that it's probably enjoyable. And so I went to go see it, very eager, definitely in the right mindset. And from the beginning, it had a very, I don't want to say boring because I think that's a very easy cop out, but there just wasn't a lot of substance to it. It felt very shallow, very hollow. Right from the get-go. And, there's some movies that start that way and you kind of got to warm up and get used to it and get into the mood for what's being presented. But throughout, I just felt the whole movie was very, very shallow and very hollow. There wasn't a lot going on outside of, some character development, the plot, some nice visuals, but that was pretty much it. And you might be able to say that that's passable as a film, and the movie is certainly watchable. I was maybe bored throughout, but not to the point where I wanted to leave or anything. It was a watchable film, but there was nothing that really grabbed me or engaged me. There's a lot of character development, if you can call it that, and I would actually say that it's not really character development. I'm sure there are plenty of viewers out there who would say that these characters are more fleshed out than some other movies and what other movies do, where it's just a typical action film. It does have some character work in it, but what's there for the character work is a lot of internal thinking by all the characters. So you get a lot of long shots of people just staring and looking off and looking serious and they're feeling something, and you're supposed to be able to, through your intuition, understand what they're feeling and they're going through. But the problem with that is that a lot of the ideas and the thoughts and the feelings that this film raises are quite dated, I would say, at this point. There's nothing new. There's new territory being covered here. This is all stuff that maybe was unique and interesting in the 90s, although that may probably not be the case. A lot of these concepts have been explored in literature before, so maybe it was the first time that it was on the screen. But in 2017, I think most audiences are used to thinking about things like the relationship between humans and AI, and what does it mean to be human, and how do you find like who you are. These are all very cliche or common themes nowadays, and so there's really not a lot of like new stuff going on. So any of the revelations that the characters have, or any of the thoughts or feelings that they're going through, it almost feels like we're retreading familiar territory. And I guess I can't blame that too much on the film, because I get that it's a reimagining of the original, and I know that the original was very groundbreaking, at least that's what people say about it. But like I said, I'm just judging this as a film now in 2017 and what I'm watching, and it feels very repetitive. Like, it doesn't feel new or original. And I'm sure though people take issue with that criticism of it, but it's more than just that. That was kind of the base level, my initial reaction to pretty much everything in the film, that nothing was new or fresh or interesting, but it's presented like, oh, it's this future, and it's, you really got to think about these things, and what does it mean to be human, and when you're a robot or a cyborg, and it's just not that interesting anymore, I guess. Maybe I wanted it to go deeper or explore some other component, but really what ends up happening is you just watch these characters having revelations or epiphanies or internal conflict that doesn't really mean anything for you, the audience. And the other thing that I would say that kind of goes along with that is that none of the characters, for what character development there's not a lot of character dynamics. And what I mean by that is the characters don't interact with each other in meaningful or interesting ways. I think you could easily point to any of the modern superhero films, the Avengers, Iron Man, the Marvel universe specifically, not so much on the DC side, but on the Marvel side, the characters all feel very friendly with one another. They seem authentic and genuine with each other, and they have a banter almost to a comical extent, to where it's like a little bit too much. There's a little bit too much of that Joss Whedon vibe that's been infused into those movies. They're very quippy, they're very smart, and they're very witty with one another, and the jokes and the banter they have back and forth. But it feels lively. It feels like they're real characters who actually interact with one another. Whereas in Ghost in the Shell, that is there's like essentially no comic relief. There's maybe one joke in the whole film that I can recall, and even that, it's not a very good one. The characters don't have any interaction other than just kind of performing their task, doing their job. And that's something that I would say is another critique I have, speaking of superhero movies, of the DC superhero films, the Superman, the new Batman, the new Justice League that's now coming. Everyone is pretty much just their role, just their job, and that's the extent of their interaction with one another. And you would almost imagine that if these characters were actually interacting, they would be totally familiar with one another's jobs, and that would not be the core dynamic of how they interact with one another, because they're familiar with each other, they know each other. And the same thing goes with Ghost in the Shell. I mean, anyone who has like an office group of friends, work is not the thing that like keeps everyone together, and your focus for a lot of the conversations that you have. A lot of the conversations are maybe deeper, more interesting, less related to what you're doing. You're performing a task, but maybe you're talking about something else, and yes, you will refer to the work you're doing or the job you're doing, but it's not the only thing sustaining you for the course of a 2-hour film. Like if you were to take your job and your work life and put it into a film, it wouldn't just be doing the job. It would be something more like the series Workaholics or something like that, where they're doing jobs, but they have this whole other life of their friendship and the characters, and that's where a lot of the character dynamics come out. And that's what I think was kind of lacking in Ghost in the Shell, is that it's so serious, so hyper serious. And for an anime, that may be fine, but watching real people only behave in this hyper serious, super focused, very dramatic fashion, it feels shallow. It feels hollow. They don't feel real or authentic. They feel like you're watching a movie, and when you only have 2 hours, or maybe not even that, 2 hours to spend with these people to fulfill the plot that's unfolding, it feels simple. And I think this is why I personally have been gravitating far more towards television and those kind of stories that can be told over the course of 13 episodes, and you can spend time with the characters, and there's time for things to develop, and there's the dynamics that take place between one another are far more interesting than what's happening in films. And that's why, going back to the Marvel movies, the interaction feels like forced almost, the amount of wittiness and banter that goes on, because they're trying to jam it all into a 2-hour film. And if you had more time, it may feel a little bit more natural, a little bit more authentic. You could spend time on the serious stuff, but then also spend time on some of the goofier, quirkier stuff as well. So to go back to Ghost in the Shell, I think it's a fine movie, something that if you just want to turn on and to watch, that would be okay. But I really don't think you're going to get that much out of it from a storytelling perspective or a character perspective. It's all very, very similar to stuff that you've probably seen before. From a cinematic perspective, the visuals, the editing, everything, it felt fine. It was, I guess it was sufficient for what it needed to be. But I also didn't get anything out of it like that blew me away. From a cinematography standpoint, everything was nice and definitely inspired by, you can definitely feel the anime inspiration, but there was nothing special or spectacular about it that really resonated with me. And then the editing also, if there are parts that felt a little clunky in terms of the pacing and the storytelling and the way that the scenes are delivered and they go from one to the next, and from the direction as well, there was this odd feeling of scenes not really finishing and then just going to the next one, or they would be over really quick. Like they would start and stop really, really fast, to where an action scene would break out and then it would almost be over before it was even started. And I'm not a fan of long, drawn-out action scenes. I don't want necessarily that to be the case, but I want it to start, build up, there be a climax, and then some time for a resolution, all within one scene, so that it feels complete. It feels like you're getting the best version of that scene, rather than it just being like, oh, that happened, here we go, next thing. That was pretty frequent throughout, and I think that's a combination of the directing and the editing, of it just not having enough breathing room, or the ramp up and ramp down just really isn't there. Things just start and then they kind of stop, and then we're on to the next thing. And so again, that lends that whole feeling of it being hollow or being shallow, where there's not really much substance there. You're just kind of seeing things happen, and there's no real tension or drama. One scene in particular, I'm not going to get into spoilers in this, I don't want to spoil it, but like, there are many, many sequences where decisions are just made without, significant decisions that could potentially in another movie, in a better movie, be more significant, be more threatening, be more dangerous, and there could be more tension there. But the decision is just made like that. There's really no conflict, no pushback. It's just, this is what we're doing, and then it happens, and then it's over, and we're on to the next thing. And so they really don't give any time for you to really feel any sense of dread or emotion, suspense for anything that's going on. And so it just feels like you're just kind of on a roller coaster, just on tracks, like, and not even the fun part of a roller coaster of like going up and, building suspense for the drop. It's just like if a roller coaster was just flat on the ground, just going forward, that's pretty much what you're watching. It's just on tracks the whole time. So I found that a really disappointing. And I think in general, a lot of movies have this problem. We live now in an age where we've got YouTube, we've got Netflix, we've got Hulu, we've got Amazon, we've got so many different venues for consuming media, that the idea of going to a theater or going to see a movie, a 2-hour experience that's going to last you potentially 2 or 3 years until the sequel comes out for that thing, right? Like if you really liked Ghost in the Shell and you want a sequel, a follow-up, a prequel, something else in that universe, in that series, the movie format, what Hollywood does, it will take at least 2 years to see something else, unless they went all out like what they're doing with Star Wars, where there's going to be a new one every year. But even that, a 2-hour experience once a year better be the most amazing experience you've ever had, because it's got to last you the whole year compared to most people are consuming media on a daily basis, whether it's on YouTube, on Netflix, wherever it is. So people are hungry for these kind of stories. And we have the time nowadays to actually spend, binge watching 13 episodes of a series in 1 week. And that's kind of the pace that people are accustomed to. So I think a lot of people are getting really tired of going to see a 2-hour film, being underwhelmed, and then there's a sequel 2 years later. Like, why do I even care? Why do I care about this series or this universe when I can go home and every year there's a new series of a TV show like House of Cards, like Game of Thrones, like any series that's put out on an annual basis, and there's more content there. There's 13 episodes, there's 20 episodes, maybe there's only 10 episodes, whatever it is, but there's more than just 2 hours. And I think I'm gravitating towards that stuff, and I think that's the realm that a lot of people are going towards, with a lot of people consuming content on YouTube and looking for more long-form content, something that they can spend time with and digest on a daily basis. And so when you look at the numbers and the track record of Hollywood and how the movie industry is going, like, it doesn't look good. I don't think it's sustainable to invest millions of dollars into these 2-hour experiences that no one really cares about, because it's not that they're bad. It's just they can't deliver the promise of what they're selling. They're selling this amazing 2-hour experience that's worth it. It's worth these huge millions and millions of dollar budgets. And when you go to see it, it's just an adequate story with limited character development, because that's all there's time for. There's only 2 hours. So you're going to get what you can get in 2 hours. And when you see what's happening with television and the budgets that are going there and what they're able to deliver, the stories they're able to tell, the special effects might not be as good. The technical side might not be as perfect as it is in feature films, but it's certainly very, very close and certainly adequate enough to satisfy most people's needs. Most people are fine watching the content that they see on YouTube, and even that is essentially like zero budget or super low budget. Granted, there are some YouTube Red series now that have a little bit more production value put into them, but that kind of content is what people are hungry for. So really, if you're going to go with the traditional Hollywood feature film format, you've really got to deliver something special. And so much of that is now focused on TV and digital and the internet that it's not surprising to me that when I parked to go see the film Ghost in the Shell, the parking lot was packed. The theater was not. The movie theater was almost a ghost town. People were out on a Friday night. They were out eating, drinking, having fun, socializing, doing things, but they weren't at the theater. And by the time the film started, the theater had filled up a little bit, but it wasn't packed. There wasn't any kind of energy or buzz or expectation, that sense you get in the room of like, oh, we're about to see something special. It was, oh, we're here to kind of waste some time. And like I said, going into it, I was actually excited because I'd heard good things, and I was excited to see something maybe special, maybe interesting, and it just wasn't that. And so it doesn't surprise me that the numbers for movie attendance are down, and yet everyone wants more and more content each and every day. And so the better for the people who watch my channel, who are creators, producers, directors, independent filmmakers, I would really encourage you to find a way to make good content, make as much of it as possible, as cheaply as possible. And that is almost an impossible task. That is very, very hard to do. But the ideas that you can like stories and ideas are cheap. Anyone can have a story. Anyone can have an idea. You can come up with characters, write it on a piece of paper, you can type it into a computer. It's free. It doesn't cost you a thing to have an idea. But the execution of it is where it's expensive. You got to get actors, you got to get locations, you got to have, CGI, you've got to have the editing, all this stuff. So the more you can limit that, but still tell really good stories with really good characters, I think that is a really sweet spot. People want that, and they're hungry for it, and they don't necessarily need the huge budgets that Hollywood puts out, but people want content. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be film content. It could be documentary content. It could be YouTube content, whatever it is. But if you're looking to produce something, I would say in the next 10 to 20 years, the current model of making a $100 million feature film is not probably going to be a thing. And so if you can find another way to do something similar, but also quite different, radically different, that's probably going to be a better use of your time and investment of your time, just because that's where things are shifting. People don't want to go to the theater anymore, and they don't necessarily want to watch movies anymore. Yes, some do. Certainly, people still enjoy movies, but I think people are far more interested in series. That's why, I mean, when you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the whole point of that is to basically make a TV show into movies, where they're all connected. They kind of tell a story from one to the next. They're all standalone, but they have this continuing plot that runs throughout them. The characters overlap, and they do these crossovers between each other. It's almost like you've got a TV series. It's just spread out over years because they're movies. If they were able to take that and actually, if Marvel were to invest their time and their resources on making their TV shows better, they might actually have something really, really successful. But I'm not saying what they're doing is not successful, because obviously a lot of people love those films. I just think it's a dying trend. I think that's going to go away. The stuff that's happening now with Star Wars and these expanded universes and the cinematic universe of any series I don't think it's sustainable. And when you see films like Ghost in the Shell or other films like it, where they're spending all this time and money on 1 2-hour product, and then it doesn't deliver, at the end of the film, it was over, and you could feel the room, the audience, basically glad that it was over. And that sounds really bad, and not that it was a terrible film, but it really was like just mediocre, and I think everyone was ready for it to be over. It was time to go, and those credits rolled, and people were like, okay, thankfully it's over now. I can go home. And maybe that was a weird isolated phenomenon where everyone in this building was on the same wavelength, but I think that's really a common occurrence now. When people go to the theater, they see something that they're expecting that's going to be this amazing 2-hour experience, and it's just not, because it can't be. It's the limitation of the format and the medium. And when you look back 20 years ago, 40 years ago, when that was the primary media that was out there in terms of the quality being so far above everything else is caught up now. And there's always going to be that challenge that Hollywood and feature films have. But if they can do it cheaper, if they can do it faster, they have an option. The only problem is they just spend so much money. They waste so much money on it. So Ghost in the Shell, I'd say check it out if you really want. It's not terrible. It's not bad, but it's also nothing special. So I'll probably forget that I saw it. It's that kind of film where, oh yeah, I saw that. That was fine. But aside from that, I probably won't think about it much again. But if you like this format, this style, this thing that I'm doing right now, please let me know. I'd be curious to see if it's something that's valuable for me to do more of. If there's anything that you wish I did different, please let me know. I am open to feedback. I want to make content that's interesting. And I know this probably isn't the most entertaining or engaging thing, but if you're curious to hear my thoughts and me talk for however long it's been, I'm certainly open to doing more of it.